Chapter 1. The Invisible Scaffold. Structures of control and psychological framing. Human consciousness does not perceive the world raw. It filters reality through an invisible scaffold of stories, symbols, and psychological frames. Whoever controls this scaffold controls the boundaries of what a society deems possible, rational, or holy. Throughout history, dominant power structures have understood that overt physical coercion is inefficient. True, lasting control is achieved when the captive willingly polices the perimeter of their own mind. Power structure, invisible scaffold, framing, internalized compliance. This psychological framing functions by dictating the baseline assumptions of daily life. By establishing what is considered normal, the scaffold renders alternative ways of thinking entirely invisible. The power of priming. Long before an individual encounters a political system or an economic model, they are fed narratives that prime them to accept hierarchy. Chapter 2. The Linear Descent. The Evolutionary Trajectory of Narrative Restriction. The narratives that govern the modern world did not materialize overnight. They are the product of a deliberate linear descent from fluid, multidimensional mythologies to rigid, highly restricted formulas. In ancestral storytelling, narrative frameworks were cyclical, expansive, and capable of holding profound contradictions. They mirrored the chaotic complexity of the natural world, recognizing that creation and destruction, strength and vulnerability, were deeply intertwined. The rise of centralized, militaristic states required a different kind of story. It required a narrative that justified expansion, normalized domination, and flattened human psychology into predictable hierarchies, scarcity, and fragmentation as natural laws. The illusion of choice. By presenting a fiercely debated, highly visible binary option within a tightly controlled framework, the architecture of control conceals the vast landscapes of thought that lie completely outside the parameters of the debate. The erasure of origin. To make a constructed system appear permanent, its historical origins must be obscured. The audience must believe the current framework has always existed, transforming an engineered trap into an inescapable reality. To break free from this containment, we must learn to see the scaffolding itself. We must examine the precise historical moments where our collective imagination was narrow-casted, preparing the ground for the modern architectures of mass distraction, ancestral myth, expansive and cyclical, V, centralized state, rigid and linear, V, modern formula, commodified and restricted. This evolutionary trajectory systematically stripped storytelling of its sovereign depth. The sanitization of myth, ancient epics, which once explored the terrifying and beautiful spectrum of the human condition, were systematically revised. Darker, more complex truths were polished away to create clean moral binaries. The cult of the singular hero. The collective, ecocentric narratives of early human communities were replaced by the myth of the isolated, hyper-individualized conqueror. Success became measured solely by domination over an external enemy or environment. The commodification of meaning. As storytelling transitioned from a sacred community ritual to a commercial product, the pressure to maximize efficiency intensified. Complexity was discarded in favor of easily digestible, repeatable formulas designed to trigger predictable emotional responses. This narrowing of the narrative pipeline set the stage for a profound psychological vulnerability. Having been conditioned for centuries by increasingly simplified stories, the human mind was perfectly primed to step into the highly optimized trap of the modern attention economy. Chapter 3. The Engineered Circus. The mechanics of your distraction. The modern digital landscape operates as an engineered circus, a highly sophisticated matrix designed to capture, fragment, and monetize human attention. This system does not seek to inform or elevate. It seeks to maintain a state of perpetual cognitive equilibrium through rapid-fire stimulation. By flooding the sensory apparatus with an endless loop of micro-rewards, breaking news alerts, and algorithmically tailored outrage, the circus systematically erodes the capacity for deep, sustained, and critical thought. Algorithmic output, hyperstimulation, cognitive fragmentation, passive consumption. The mechanics of this distraction are structural, relying on precise psychological triggers to keep the mind anchored in the immediate present. The infinite scroll. By removing physical and visual boundaries, the interface exploits the brain's natural curiosity, creating a psychological loop where the user constantly seeks a resolution that never arrives. Dopamine mining. Every notification, like and share acts as a variable neural reward, conditioning the user to seek validation from the machine and shortening the human attention span to mere seconds. Context. Collapse. The circus presents tragedy, comedy, advertising, and personal updates in a singular, undifferentiated stream. This collapse prevents the mind from forming the deep emotional and intellectual frameworks required to process complex realities. The ultimate achievement of the engineered circus is the creation of a compliant consumer. A mind that is perpetually distracted is a mind that cannot organize, cannot remember its historical lineage, and cannot question the underlying structures of authority that profit from its fragmentation. Chapter 4. The Erasure of the Divine Feminine. The modern cultural landscape frequently reduces women to supporting archetypes. Within dominant male genres, the female perspective is often fragmented. It exists primarily to serve the protagonist's arc rather than her own. This subjection is not a natural historical trajectory. It is a constructed erasure. To understand this modern diminishment, we must look back to the cradle of civilization. In ancient Mesopotamia, the feminine was not merely equal, it was supreme. Ancient Mesopotamia, Bronze Iron Age shift, modern male genre, female as supreme deity rise of military kings, female as subservient archetype, Inanna, Ishtar, and male-dominated pantheons, loss of voice and agency, the cradle of the goddess. In early Mesopotamian society, cosmic power was explicitly female. Foremost was Inanna, later known as Ishtar Inanna. She was the supreme queen of heaven Inanna. She commanded both the chaotic fury of warfare and the generative power of love Inanna. Kings did not rule by brute force alone. They required the ritual blessing of Inanna to legitimize their crowns Inanna. Creation, justice, and destruction were seen as inherently feminine capabilities. The divine universe was anchored by a goddess. The earthly reflection. This divine reverence directly influenced the legal and social status of mortal women in ancient Mesopotamia. Early Mesopotamian women enjoyed significant autonomy. Economic independence. Women bought land, managed grand estates, and contractually controlled specialized industries like textile production and brewing. Women in ancient Mesopotamia. Legal protections. Early cuneiform traditions allowed women to secure divorces and protect their personal wealth from male relatives. Women in ancient Mesopotamia. The first author. The world's first recorded author was Enheduanna. Women in ancient Mesopotamia. She was a high priestess who wielded immense political and literary power through her hymnal poetry. Women in ancient Mesopotamia. The Great Transition and legal codification. The shift away from female autonomy occurred gradually as city-states centralized and militarized. The rise of constant state-level warfare prioritized physical conflict. This shifted social value toward male warriors. This social restructuring was systematically codified into law. We see this violent degradation of rights transition through historical legal frameworks. Early Sumerian custom. Code of Hammurabi. Middle Assyrian laws. High autonomy and rights conditional protections. Total subjugation and veiling. The Code of Hammurabi. c. 1750 BCE. This era represents a transitional compromise. Code of Hammurabi. While women could still trade and own property, the law began firmly placing them under male custody. A husband could divorce a wife with minimal justification, but a wife seeking divorce faced severe scrutiny. If she was found to be negligent or go about ruining her house, she was cast into the water to drown. The Middle Assyrian laws, c. 1000 BCE. By this period, the erasure was nearly absolute. Women were legally classified as the property of their fathers or husbands. This era introduced mandatory veiling laws. Respectable married women were forced to veil themselves in public to signify male ownership. Slaves and prostitutes were strictly forbidden from veiling. If caught doing so, they faced public beating and the loss of their ears. Concurrently, male gods like Marduk and Asher were elevated to the top of the pantheon. They conquered or absorbed the attributes of older goddesses. This historical pivot created the foundation for the modern male genre. It replaced the multi-faceted goddess with a simplified, diminished counterpart. Chapter 5. The Fractured Lens, Modern Archetypes and the Captive Mind. The transition from the sovereign Mesopotamian goddess to the secondary figures of modern storytelling was not accidental. It was a centuries-long containment project. When the state-level war machines of late antiquity stripped the goddess of her armor and her pen, they did not just alter religion, they re-engineered the human imagination. Today, the modern male genre operates as the downstream psychological consequence of that ancient coup. Within contemporary literature, film, and digital media, the female perspective is rarely allowed to exist for its own sake. Instead, it is fragmented into restrictive, highly specialized archetypes. These formulas do not reflect human complexity. They are designed to keep the audience's attention locked into familiar, passive patterns. The toolkit of containment. Modern tropes. Modern narratives use specific formulas to limit female agency while maintaining the illusion of inclusion. The recompensatory prize. The female character functions primarily as an external reward for the male protagonist's triumph. Her value is directly tied to his character growth. The hyper-competent catalyst. Often labeled the strong female character, this archetype possesses flawless physical combat skills but lacks internal conflict, vulnerability, or a personal agenda. Her purpose is to fight alongside the hero, validate his struggle, and offer a sterile imitation of power that never threatens the underlying patriarchal hierarchy. The emotional anchor. She is confined strictly to the domestic or emotional sphere. Her pain, captivity, or demise serves as the raw narrative fuel, fridging, to spark the male protagonist's vengeance or awakening. The symbiosis of distraction and subjugation. This is where the mechanics of the Engineered Circus, Chapter 3, lock perfectly into place with the erasure of the divine feminine, Chapter 4. The rapid-fire, surface-level stimulation of modern media platforms relies heavily on these simplified tropes. Deep, multi-dimensional characters require slow, contemplative engagement to understand. Stereotypes, however, can be processed instantly. Engineered Circus, rapid content. V, demand for instant comprehension. V, reliance on flat, hypersexualized archetypes. V, erasure of nuanced, sovereign female agency. The circus demands speed, and speed demands cliches. By flooding the cultural landscape with hypersexualized or entirely passive female imagery, the media machinery ensures that the audience remains in a state of superficial gratification. You are too busy consuming the Chapter 6, Reclaiming the Quill, Strategies for Deconstruction. The historical arc from the sovereign Mesopotamian goddess to the flat archetypes of the modern male genre reveals a deliberate containment project. However, recognizing the mechanics of this erasure provides the exact toolkit needed to dismantle it. To break free from the captive mind described in Chapter 5, the modern writer and consumer must actively deconstruct these engineered narratives. Reclaiming the narrative requires more than just adding female characters into male-defined spaces. It demands a fundamental shift in storytelling architecture. Traditional male genre inserts strong female, trapped in male framework, deconstructed narrative, rebuilds infrastructure, restores sovereign agency. 1. Dismantling the synthetic archetype. The first step in deconstruction is rejecting the strong female character illusion, which merely coats a flat character in physical armor. Restoring internal sovereignty. Characters must possess desires, flaws, and conflicts that exist entirely independent of the male protagonist's journey. Her primary narrative purpose cannot be to motivate, validate, or rescue him. The spectrum of humanity. Writers must reintroduce the complex duality once embodied by Inanna. She was not restricted to a singular emotional lane. She was simultaneously the deity of chaotic warfare and profound love, Inanna. Modern female characters must be allowed to be brilliant, deeply flawed, destructive, and vulnerable all at once. Disrupting the feed to counteract the fast-paced stimulation of the Engineered Circus, Chapter 3, the structure of the text itself must change. Intentional friction. Authors can use narrative pacing, complex subplots, and shifting perspectives to slow down the reader's consumption rate. This friction breaks the habit of passive consumption. Subverting expectations. By intentionally presenting a familiar cliché, such as the recompensatory prize, and systematically subverting it, the narrative forces the audience out of its autopilot state. This disruption makes the consumer consciously aware of the media manipulation they have been conditioned to accept. Excavating historical memory. The final strategy is historical excavation. The systematic stripping of rites seen in the transition from early Sumerian custom to the Middle Assyrian laws was a political choice, not an inevitable evolution. Women in ancient Mesopotamia. Mirroring the past. By weaving elements of historical truths, like the economic independence of early priestesses or the systematic implementation of restrictive legal codes, into modern fiction, writers can expose the artificiality of contemporary gender dynamics. Women in ancient Mesopotamia. Rewriting the framework. Fiction can serve as a laboratory to reconstruct societies that mirror the balance of the ancient world. This offers readers a tangible alternative to the male-dominated genres that currently captivate the public imagination. By turning the pen into an excavation tool, the modern manuscript ceases to be mere entertainment. It becomes an act of architectural restoration, rebuilding the sovereign spaces that were dismantled millennia ago. Chapter 7. The synthesis, beyond the binary paradigm. The ultimate goal of deconstruction is not to invert the hierarchy, but to dismantle the framework entirely. Replacing a male-dominated narrative with an equally flat female-dominated one simply replaces one side of an engineered cage with another. To truly move past the restrictions of the modern male genre, storytelling must achieve a synthesis. This means merging the deep historical memory of the sovereign feminine with the architectural lessons learned from breaking the Engineered Circus. Thesis: Ancient Feminine Sovereignty. Antithesis: Modern Male Hegemony. B. Synthesis: Integrated Narrative. The architecture of an integrated narrative. An integrated narrative does not rely on gendered power struggles to generate tension. Instead, it mirrors the cosmic balance sought by ancient civilizations before the rise of militaristic state codes, women in ancient Mesopotamia. Shared agency. Power and vulnerability are distributed based on individual character psychology, not predetermined gender archetypes. The reclaimed pantheon. Stories return to a structural model where multiple forces, creative, destructive, chaotic, and orderly, coexist without the requirement that one systematically subjugate the other. Abolishing the mirror. Female characters cease to function as psychological mirrors reflecting male growth. Concurrently, male characters are freed from the rigid, emotionally sterile demands of the traditional hyper-masculine hero, breaking the loop. Achieving this synthesis requires an active partnership between the creator and the consumer. The media machinery described in Chapter 3 will continue to pump out fast, cheap, and highly archetypal content because it remains incredibly profitable. The individual mind breaks this loop through conscious selection. By demanding and supporting narratives that offer intentional friction, historical depth, and genuine psychological sovereignty, the audience starves the engineered circus of its primary fuel, uncritical attention, the living paradigm. We stand at a critical cultural crossroads. The tools of digital distribution allow for unprecedented manipulation, but they also grant us the ability to bypass traditional gatekeepers. The modern writer no longer needs permission from a centralized, male-dominated industry to publish alternative paradigms. Just as Enheduanna utilized the early technology of cuneiform script to stamp her identity and cosmic vision onto clay tablets, the modern storyteller has the digital infrastructure to bypass the circus entirely, women in ancient Mesopotamia. By picking up the digital quill with an active awareness of the past, we do not merely rewrite our fiction, we reclaim our collective future. Epilogue, Afterword, The Awake Sovereign. The journey through these pages is not merely an academic exercise in literary criticism or ancient history. It is a diagnostic map of your own attention. The structures explored throughout this manuscript, from the attention-devouring gears of the Engineered Circus to the violent legal strokes of the Middle Assyrian laws, were designed to achieve a singular outcome: the quiet engineering of a passive, predictable human mind, women in ancient Mesopotamia. When we look back at the clay tablets of early Sumer, we are not looking at a primitive world, but a balanced one. A world where cosmic power wore a female crown, where the first author signed her name with pride, and where human complexity was celebrated, not codified out of existence women in ancient Mesopotamia. The systematically executed erasure of that world was the blueprint for every modern mechanism of control we tolerate today. By flattening the multi-faceted goddess into a passive prize, the architects of our cultural narratives proved that if you can restrict what people imagine, you can restrict how they live. The modern media machine relies entirely on your amnesia. It requires you to forget that stories were once spaces of deep, soul-stirring friction rather than fast-paced algorithmic candy. It requires you to accept the hollow, uninspired archetypes of the male genre as a natural baseline rather than an engineered prison. But amnesia is not permanent. The moment you choose slow intent over rapid-fire distraction, the circus loses its grip. The moment you demand female characters who possess absolute internal sovereignty, the ancient erasure begins to crack. You are the final arbiter of this narrative war. Every click, every page turned, and every word written is either a submission to the captive machinery or an act of active rebellion. The digital quill is in your hands. The clay is waiting. Step out of the circus, remember the goddess, and write yourself awake.